All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's live cooking demonstration. My name is Ryan Smith. I'm the Wellness Program Administrator with Georgia State University's Employee Development and Wellness Services. By trade, I am a registered dietitian, and I'm very excited to share this recipe with you today. Before we get started, I do want to cover just a couple quick things. We are going to be recording today's session, so you can watch it at a later time or share it with a colleague who may not have been able to attend. We do upload recordings of our sessions to our EDWS YouTube page, where you can find previous cooking demonstrations, yoga, guided meditation, and more. So we encourage you to check that out if you're looking for more wellness programming. Throughout today's presentation, you may have questions or comments, and we'd love to hear them. You can make use of the WebEx chat box feature to let us know what you're thinking, or if you want anything clarified as we go through the recipe, and we'll be sure to check those at the end of the presentation and go through all of them. I'm joined today by my colleague, Cheryl Johnson-Ransaw, so she'll be able to keep an eye on the chat as well. If you experience any technical issues, audio or video, please make sure your comment is going to all panelists. That way she'll be able to see it and help you troubleshoot anything that may be occurring. With that being said, we will go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be making a summer skillet scramble. I know it's not quite summer yet, but the weather's warming up. It's been a little bit nicer. And really, when it says summer skillet, it's just making use of some vegetables that are typically in season in summer. However, we have access to them year-round with grocery stores, which is always great. And I was just in the mood for making a breakfast dish that really incorporates a lot of vegetables. That's something a lot of people I talk with struggle with is, how do I get vegetables in the morning? You know, a lot of meals don't feel like they pair well with veggies, but this is a great dish to up that vegetable intake. In terms of equipment, very, very simple recipe. We need a cutting board, you'll need a mixing bowl, and then a large skillet. We're going to be cooking on the stovetop today. Emphasis on large skillet. If you have a medium one, you'll be okay, but just know that we are chopping up a lot of vegetables, and that can add up over time, and it may start to really fill your skillet. So the first thing we're going to do is actually prepare our potatoes. So these are just red potatoes. You can really use any variety here. Gold potatoes would work well. The brown russet potatoes would work, but we're just working with red today because I happen to have some already. Two small ones, or if you've got a medium or a large one, just use one. This recipe we're scaling down to make about 2 servings, so it is a little bit smaller. And the reason for that is I know not everyone is as big of a fan of leftover eggs. So the recipe's been scaled down to be great for 1 or 2 meals or to share with someone else in your household, but you won't have so many leftovers that you don't know what to do with them. So I've gone ahead and rinsed, washed, and scrubbed these. Potatoes are one of those vegetables that it's a little bit irregular in shape. So what I like to do is my first cut is just going to be a little bit off the bottom to create a level side like that. And that means that we can place this potato on the cutting board and it's not going to roll around like it would on the more rounded edge. That's a good strategy to help make sure it's more secure and that our knife isn't going to be, missing as the potato is rolling around. Now, our goal here is really going to be to cut this fairly thin and sort of end up doing these thin, like cubed slices, I should say. It's just going to be chopped up, but we want to keep it very thin so that it can cook quickly in the skillet. So what I do is I'm just going to cut with my knife, try to make some pretty thin slices, and I'll show you what the width looks like here in just a moment. And just make your way through that potato. Now, when you start getting closer to your fingers, closer to the edge of the potato, if you don't feel as secure about cutting it, I would recommend just turning it, and you can make cuts in other directions to try to break that up. So in terms of thinness, you can see they're pretty thin. That is what we're aiming for. And once you've got that, I usually will stack these, and I'm just going to cut them in half, turn them, and then make a couple additional cuts going along the side. And our goal is to get these smaller pieces because these will cook nicely in the skillet. So we'll just repeat that process for the other pieces of potato we've cut here. Now, potatoes they're interesting. I feel like they get a really bad reputation nutritionally, which I'm always working to try to teach people more about. I think recently potatoes are associated with, it's a lot of carbs, they're high in calories, they're not very good for you. While potatoes are a source of carbohydrate, they are a vegetable. They are a healthy food. It's all in how we choose to prepare them. If you have French fries and they're, a lot of oil, a lot of extra stuff added to them, or we're topping them with a bunch of cheese, yes, we're making a less healthy dish. But the potato itself is a source of healthy carbohydrates. It is a good source of fiber, which is great for our body. It's an excellent source of potassium. It's got a number of different vitamins and minerals in it that really benefit our body. So in my mind, it's actually more of a nutritional superstar. It's just, how are we making use of it? Are we cooking it with a little bit less oil? Are we pairing it with some other good foods? So keep that in mind the next time someone tries to talk down potatoes. I do think that they have a lot of nutritional value, and they're an affordable food that people seem to like. So working them into your diet can be great. Another thing a lot of people will talk about is white potatoes versus sweet potatoes. Both varieties of potatoes are about similar or almost identical in calories. They're slightly different in some of the nutrients, but they both offer value in different places. So I encourage people, if you like sweet potatoes, if you like white potatoes, cook them in a healthy way, enjoy them in moderation, and they are a great fit for our diet. So we've finished chopping up those 2 potatoes. What I'm going to do now is, on the large skillet, I'm going to take a tablespoon of cooking oil of your choice. I'm just using canola oil today. And we're going to get that over a medium heat and get it heated up. All right, so we'll give that just a moment to start to heat, and we're going to add the potatoes to it. Now, it's recommended in the recipe, if you can, to cover the potatoes while they're cooking by themselves. Now, the skillet I'm using is very, very large, and I actually don't have a lid big enough to fit it. But there are some workarounds you can do. This is the next biggest lid I have, which will not fit this skillet. It will fall inside of it a little bit. And what I do when this happens is I will try to spread the potatoes out as evenly as possible, sort of group them together, and just rest this gently on top of the potatoes themselves. There'll be a little bit of a barrier so it's not directly on the skillet. And that will create enough of a covering that as things start to steam, it still traps some of that heat in and helps them cook a little faster. So it doesn't have to be perfect. I do not recommend putting one of these in direct contact with your skillet, however. We don't want that to happen. So like I said, I usually rest it a little bit on top of the potatoes. So let's go ahead and add the potatoes to our skillet. We're just going to mix these around, make sure they come into contact with all the oil, try to have them spread out in that even layer. And then, like I said, I'm going to group them up and just set the lid on top of them, help them cook a little faster. Just like that. So those are going to cook for about 8 minutes by themselves because they are firmer, starchier, they take longer. So we put them in first, and then we'll add other things to them, and they'll continue to cook. So 8 minutes, I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. Let's go ahead and prep some of our next vegetables. So next up, we're going to be making use of a zucchini or a summer squash. We're just going to cut this into slices, almost like you would with a cucumber. So I'm just going to cut the tip off here, and then we're just going to keep some pretty thin slices going through it, making our way through. We want about a cup of sliced zucchini total. If you have a smaller zucchini, that may be making use of the entire zucchini. If it's a larger zucchini, you may only need to cut about half or 3/4 of it. I'm going to do about 3/4, save this for another dish, and we've got our cup of sliced zucchini there. So this is going to bring in some good vitamin and mineral content, some vitamin C, some additional fiber, and we will just set those little slices off to the side there. Now, this was a pretty narrow zucchini. If you have one that's thicker, you may want to make your slices even smaller so you don't have really, really big ones. You can kind of adjust as desired. Next up is our bell pepper. I cook with these all the time if you've been watching these demonstrations. This guy pops up all the time just because they're pretty affordable. I think they're tasty and they're very nutritious. My cutting method for these, because they are very irregular and like to roll around on the cutting board, I will take the knife and cut off the top like so, and then I'm going to repeat that process down here on the bottom. And what we've done is we've made sort of this tube where we've got these 3 to 4 connection points on the inside. We're going to just, with our knife, gently cut those. Shouldn't take too much force. And then you'll be able to pull that middle part, pull that middle part right out. And you'll have that too. From here, we'll cut that in half. And what this ultimately allows us to do is flatten that down and then continue to chop it with a much more even surface. So we'll do some thin strips here. We're ultimately going to go for a dice like we've been doing with our potato. Something to note about the potatoes is they cook in the background. I said it's about 8 minutes. We are going to want to stir them occasionally. We don't want just one side to burn, so we'll mix them around here in a second. Once you've cut your bell pepper that direction, I will turn it 90 degrees and then run my knife through in the other direction to get a nice little cube going there. So we'll repeat that process with these pieces. Okay, so we'll move that over here. I'm going to pause for a second, just stir the potatoes around real quick. And while you're cooking the potatoes, I said 8 minutes. That's a good metric to go by, but we're also looking for them to just start to soften a little bit. You probably won't see a whole lot of browning because they'll continue to cook, as I mentioned, when we add the other veggies. So coming back to our bell pepper, these kind of awkward top and bottom pieces we cut, we're just going to slice through those, make some vertical strips, turn them, and then continue to cut to get similar sized pieces to our other ones. These pieces never cut quite as nicely because they're not as uniform in shape, but they'll blend in pretty well with the rest of it. And then we'll repeat that process for the top, cutting off those edible portions and working our way around the stem. And I'll run the knife through a couple more times just to make those pieces a little smaller. Doesn't have to be perfect, but our goal is to make them as similar in size as possible. That way they'll cook evenly. If you've got a really big piece and a really small piece, they'll cook at slightly different rates because of the thickness of them. And then you'll get things that are a little uneven, and that's not ideal. So we've got a couple more minutes going on the potatoes there. We'll let them sit for maybe about 3 more minutes. We've gotten these chopped and prepped. And there's one more vegetable we do want to prep. I'm going to see if we can fit it all on one cutting board. And that's going to be our green onions. So the green onions are going to add a nice flavor to things. We're actually going to add them almost last in the recipe. They'll cook pretty quickly. We'll add them in with the eggs that we're working with. But in terms of these, we're going to use half of a bunch. So when you buy them, they're in a little bundle. We'll use about half of it for this scaled down version of the recipe. Now you can cut all the way up to the whites if you want. Some people prefer to start at the green and cut those whites off because the whites are a little tougher. I'll leave that up to you, but I'm going to chop them off for now. I'm going to turn my attention to potatoes again. You'll hear them sizzle as you cook. So it's a good idea to keep an eye on them and stir them every so often. All right, and I can tell they're starting to soften. There'll be a little bit of a visual cue, but you can always poke into them with a fork or a utensil to see if they're giving a little bit. So for the green onions, really all we're going to do is line them up, and we're going to just make thin slices going across. This is a really good time to talk about the claw method, where you take your hand, you bend like that, and your fingertips should be tucked in behind your knuckles. The idea here is that if your knife somehow scrapes your hand a little bit, you're just going to nick the tip of your knuckle a little bit rather than hitting your fingertip, which is bad news. So we'll use that claw pinch grip to just make these small chops and work our way through the green onion. Now, the smaller you can make these, the better. It'll help distribute the flavor a little bit more. If you get some big pieces, it's not the end of the world, but just keep that in mind that if we can go for that finer dice, that's ideal. I've had some people ask me about what kind of knife I use before, and I'll tell you that this knife is like 4 years old, and it is a $13 knife from Walmart. It is not a fancy knife. The trick is it came with a sharpener, and if you use the sharpener, you can turn an average knife into one that'll actually last you a very long time. So you can see it cuts through things pretty well, and I've been very pleased with it. So if you've got a knife that doesn't feel like it's working well, investing in a sharpener can make a huge difference. Okay, those potatoes are really sizzling. So what we're going to do is we are going to add our bell pepper and our zucchini to the potatoes now. And we're going to remove the lid. So we're done with the lid portion of things, and we can go ahead and add this in. Remember, we're keeping the green onions separate for now, so let's give these a stir. All right, so we're still working with a medium heat. We're going to cook this for about another 8 minutes, giving the bell pepper and the zucchini time to soften, and the potato will now actually start to brown and get a little crispy like we want out of a cooked potato. So now we've chopped up our green onion. Let's talk a little bit now about eggs. So we are going to be using 3 eggs for this recipe. Now, not everyone is a big fan of eggs. I know some of the things we do on here are entirely plant-based or entirely vegan. This is a vegetarian dish because we are working with eggs today. These are pasture-raised eggs, which you do not have to get. Some people prefer it for ethical reasons. They are a little bit more expensive. If you're not an egg person at all, this is a great dish to work a tofu scramble into, which if you are vegan, you probably are familiar with it, or you can look up tofu scramble as an option, and you could replace the eggs outright with that. But we're going to be working with the eggs today. Like I said, we're going to use 3 of them. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and crack these open into a medium-sized bowl. And the eggs are our primary source of protein in this dish today. A single egg has about 6 to 7 grams of protein. And it's a nice way to start your day, get that protein in, help you feel satisfied, fuel those muscles. All right, so we've got 3 of them going in. I'm going to rinse my hands off real quick. And then before I start whisking those, I'm going to give our skillet a stir so that things can get in contact with the pan. And just to show you what we're working with, you can see those vegetables sizzling, starting to cook together. Very nice color variety there. And things are starting to brown, which is great. So we've got our 3 eggs, and we are just going to lightly beat them. Our goal is to break up the yolk and the yellow part and incorporate it into the rest of the egg. And it should be pretty smooth in its texture and color once you're done whisking everything together. Okay, we'll see if I can actually show you this without spilling it. So you can see it's that even yellow color there. That's what we're looking for. So we'll set that to the side. We got a couple more minutes to let this cook. I'm going to stir it again. And you might have noticed we haven't added much in the way of flavor or seasoning yet. We are going to do that. However, we save that for towards the end of the recipe. And the goal behind that is we want the flavor to be able to hit all of our ingredients. If we put it in on just the potatoes, then the eggs may not have the salt and the flavor we're looking for. So that's why we've saved those. The next step and our next ingredient is we're going to be using some fresh thyme today. That's Thyme, thyme. You can buy dried versions of this, which will totally work, but the fresh one will definitely give you a little bit more of a kick, a little bit more of the flavor. And I've gone ahead and rinsed this. What I'm going to do is bunch this up like so, and then we are just going to run our knife through it, again, being careful of our fingertips, watching our positioning on it, and then we'll turn it and just continue that process until we've got it pretty finely minced. In terms of quantity, we're going to do about 2 teaspoons of this minced thyme. If you're using a dried version, you'll use about 1/3 of that because it's going to be more potent, more concentrated. Okay? So we've chopped that up. And if you go to the grocery store, in the produce section, there'll be a little refrigerated part where you can usually find, like at Kroger, they have these small boxes of the fresh herbs you can buy. So that's a good place to do it. You could do this with thyme. You could do it with rosemary. Really, any fresh herb, I think, could be a nice addition to this dish. So we've had that cooking for close to that 8 minutes now. What we're going to do is add in our fresh herbs, our fresh thyme, and just sprinkle that around. And then we'll give that a stir as well. And that's really the start of us adding some flavor to this dish, because like I said, right now the vegetables are pretty bland. So we start with the thyme, we're going to add a little bit of flavor, and then we're also going to use a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground black pepper, and then 1 tablespoon of hot sauce. Now I'm adding the hot sauce because I think the vinegar, the sort of acidic nature of it, pairs really nicely with the other flavors here. If you are not a spicy person, you don't have to use hot sauce. You can add a vinegar of some sort to it, or a great thing to pair things like this with would be a very mild salsa. You could do a store-bought salsa, and when you cook the dish at the end, scoop some salsa on top of it, and that'll really bring some nice flavors together. So our next step is very interesting. We're going to cook the egg with our green onions, and what we're going to do is we are going to create a circle in the middle of the skillet, spreading our vegetables out to the perimeter, the outside of it, and that circle in the middle is sort of the target for our eggs. So we'll drop the eggs in, we'll let them start to scramble, we'll stir them around lightly, but we want to create a spot in the middle so they can come into contact with the heat. They will mix with the vegetables a little bit naturally as we stir. That's expected and part of the design, but we want to make sure we create a space for them to come down. So I'm going to spread the vegetables out and make that circle. And first I'll show you, I don't know if you can see some of the browning happening here. We can tell these vegetables are nearly cooked, which is perfect. And just to show you again, I've created that circle in the middle for the eggs to go in on. And for this last part, we're going to adjust the heat down to a medium-low heat for cooking the eggs. So we'll go ahead and pour this in. And then I'm going to add our green onions on top of the eggs. And we'll cook this probably for about 2 minutes. It won't take too long for the eggs to start to scramble. So we'll give it about 2 minutes to cook. We're going to gently stir it around. Our goal is to have the eggs not stick to the skillet and overcook. We want them to get a little bit of even heating throughout, like you do with a typical scramble. So I'm just going to use the spoon to move things around, make sure the eggs aren't getting stuck. And at this point, the vegetables can join in as you stir things around. The eggs can come into contact with them, and that is totally fine. You don't have to keep that circle going. Okay, so we're going to let that continue to cook over the medium-low heat, probably for another minute or so here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get our little seasonings here ready. The eggs have started to get scrambled and more solidified, which is what we want. So we can go ahead and add in, again, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, and then I'm doing a tablespoon of hot sauce. And then we'll give that a stir as well. And just to show you what we're starting to look like now, you can see the scrambles formed. Those eggs are looking nice. We'll put that back on the heat. And then the final thing we'll do, we've got one more ingredient. We're really packing all the vegetables we can in here. We're going to do a cup of leafy greens. Spinach is great. Arugula is great. Whatever you have on hand that can take a little bit of heat is good. So I'm going to do a cup of, this is spinach and arugula mixed in. And we're going to just cook that till it starts to wilt down a little bit and soften. All right, so we'll give that just a minute. And while that cooks, I can talk a little bit about the nutrition of this dish. So as I mentioned, this is a scaled back version designed to make about 2 servings. Each serving has about 325 calories in it. So a nice light breakfast. If you're looking for more food, you could pair it with a piece of fruit. Think like a citrus fruit. An orange would go really nice with this, or a clementine. So that would be an enjoyable pairing. Or potentially if you wanted to serve this as like a breakfast taco on a tortilla or something like that, I think that could be nice as well. But as it is, 2 servings, about 325 calories a piece. In terms of protein, we're looking at about 14 to 15 grams of protein. Most of that is coming from our eggs, but altogether, some of the vegetables do contribute a little bit of protein as they add up. In terms of fiber, this recipe is awesome. Between the zucchini and the bell pepper, the greens, all the potatoes we're adding in, we really get to a nice amount of fiber, which is good for blood sugar control, weight maintenance, healthy cholesterol, and just healthy digestion. So I'm going to give it a stir real quick again, make sure those greens are wilting and in contact with the heat. And for this last step, there's not a specific amount of time. It's usually about 2 to 3 minutes, but I cook until those greens have fully wilted. I don't want them to be too crunchy. I want them to be sort of soft like cooked spinach would normally be. And that's kind of the marker I use to figure out when it's done. Leftovers, you can keep this in an airtight container in the fridge. However, as I mentioned, I think this recipe compared to some of the other ones we do on the demonstration, it doesn't hold up quite as well. I think you'll be fine reheating it the next day. But by day 3 or 4, for me, whenever I cook with eggs, the texture, the quality is just not quite there for me. And that's why this recipe is designed to just do the 2 servings. So a little bit smaller, but definitely a healthy breakfast. You can see all the vegetables we worked into this. A lot of people don't get any vegetables with their breakfast, and we have really taken it up quite a few notches here. Again, potatoes, zucchini, bell pepper, the spinach and mixed greens, and then we've got some fresh herbs and whatnot going into it. So a great dish overall. I'm going to kill the heat. I think we could cook those greens just a little bit longer, but I want to show you what that final dish looks like. All the eggs scrambled together there. We've got a nice like browning on the edges of zucchini, the bell peppers, the potatoes. It is a very, very tasty dish. I really enjoy it. And in terms of the flavors we played with today, we kept it pretty simple with the salt and pepper and the thyme. I like the hot sauce, as I mentioned, to add a little bit of an acid to it. But I think salsa is a really nice complement to a dish like this. So if you've got some mild salsa or something like that, you can mix in, go for it. You could also use different seasonings, some cumin, some cayenne pepper, chili powder. I think could make kind of a Southwestern spin on this if you wanted to. It's pretty flexible because we're using vegetables that I think work well with most seasonings. So that's really it. You can see it's a little involved. We are kind of going back from the stovetop to cutting the vegetables. If you aren't talking through it like I am, this is about a 20-25 minute recipe, but it makes a really nice dish and it's a really healthy way to start your day. We will be sending out a copy of the recipe along with the nutrition information so you can see how it might fit into your day and potentially try it at home if you're interested in doing so. We'll send that recipe in a follow-up email, which will include the recording of today's video, as well as a link to a short survey where you can let us know what you thought of today's presentation and if you've got any suggestions for future presentations. I'm going to take a quick look at the chat, see if we have any questions. Okay, so this is a question sent to me about just swaps for it. So I mentioned if you're not an egg person, a tofu scramble would work well. In terms of the vegetables themselves, we're working with bell peppers and zucchini today, but if you've got other vegetables you like that you want to cook into this, some mushrooms could go into this. You could do some, like, I think chopped up cherry tomatoes towards the later phase since they cook a little faster. Could add some of that acid, nice bursts of flavor to this. Really, there's a lot of options whenever you're just making a skillet scramble like this. The potatoes are going to be providing some carbohydrates to balance and give you a little more sustained energy. So if you want to take the potatoes out, I would suggest finding another carbohydrate source to pair this with. I mentioned maybe doing breakfast tacos. So if you wanted to serve these in tortillas or in a larger tortilla for like a breakfast burrito, that could balance out if you remove the potatoes and want to add another source of carbs. But you can definitely make it your own and really mix and match there. And I think that was actually the only question we got today. So a little bit lighter on questions today. But thank you everyone so much for attending. I appreciate you checking this out and seeing this healthy recipe. Like I said, keep an eye out for that email where we'll send you some follow-up information. And if you aren't already on our mailing list, we do events like this twice a month, as well as a variety of other well-being events, meditation, yoga, mindful moments, all sorts of things like that. So if you want to be on our mailing list, you can email us at edws@gsu.edu, and we'll get you on that list so that you can start receiving our weekly emails that go out on Monday to let you know all the good events that we have planned. And we'll be sure to put that email in the chat if anyone is interested in joining the mailing list. With that being said, thank you again for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.